And there's so much that just in a normal conversation, it's like we could actually have in common. And if we look to that commonality, we can be more productive, whether it's like you said, a personal relationship, a work relationship, business. We can just get more done.
Yeah, yeah. Many years ago, I was involved in some kind of mediation with Arabs and Jews.
Okay.
And they walked in, these two groups walked into the room and they hated each other's guts,
Sure.
right? Bad people, bad, horrible people. But as soon as they started talking about their children and that it was like it was amazing to see that a little bit of humanity and commonality and those ideas that they had
Yeah.
been brainwashed with over a lifetime started to loosen
Yeah.
and they could feel those connections and
Yeah, I did a course with Dr. Josh Weiss. He was one of the two men that actually created the Abraham Path over in the Middle East through Harvard's program on negotiation, and fascinating work. Like I said, I did the Abraham Path. I was supposed to go over to Jordan and do a section of the Abraham Path with him. But of course, COVID came, they had to cancel. They haven't been able to reopen Jordan and do that, but they did a virtual version. And it was really, really fascinating learning, how, um, he was one of two people that actually was able, like you said, to find that commonality between the Israelis, the Palestinians, the Arabs, and figure out, okay, what commonality? We've got Father Abraham. We both acknowledge Abraham as our father. Okay, well, how do we then build, a safe space? How do we build up our countries? How do we build tourism? How do we help both of you, even though you have differences? And they were able to then, find that commonality, whether it was historical documents, the Quran, the Bible, and go, okay, here's the path that Abraham, who we all have in common, they found that commonality, and let's figure out, okay, let's trace his path through the Middle East from birth to death, and now let's create a path, and it's a safe zone that all the countries come around and say, okay, we're going to not deal with, not let anybody get hurt, protect everybody. This is a safe place. And it's crazy. It's crazy that it's worked.
yeah yeah
But like you said, it's that commonality.
yeah well much closer to home I see the similar kinds of issues with sales teams, marketing teams, and customer service,
Okay.
right? They each have their own, right? Like the salespeople, if we're not meeting our revenue numbers, it must be the marketing
It's
people.
got to be. They didn't market it.
And oh, it's got to be no, and they no, it's got to be the customer service people, or
Yeah.
maybe maybe the shipping people. They're not keeping up with the orders.
Right.
So it's interesting to even there to very similar to what you were just saying to come back to actually we all want the same thing.
Yeah.
Let's and to create structures. So I think often I see organizations create structures that divide people, right?
Yes.
You know, if you give bonuses based on certain things as opposed to bonuses based on what are we all doing as a team,
Yeah.
and are the right mix and blend of those, and
Yeah. I experienced that. So when I first started doing mediation, I subcontracted through our local courthouse. And so we had what we call an ADR, or Alternative Dispute Resolution Department. And it was very interesting because just like you're saying, like in business, the way the courthouse was structured was a very us versus them mentality. I mean, we're trying to negotiate, but then the judges are doing one thing, and then the clerks are doing another, and the judicial assistants are blaming this one, and everything. And so, for their newsletter, I actually wrote an article going, look, we need to stop blaming one another. If anything, we are one unit. And if there's an us versus them, it's the judicial system, and then there is the people.
Mhm.
The people would come in seeking help, and it's just all this. Well, the judicial assistant's not doing this, and the clerk didn't file this, and so the mediator can't do this. And so I wrote this article, and the director of mediation said, Matthew, we can't publish this. And I'm like, why not? She goes, you want a target on your back? I'm like, it's the truth. Like, we need to come together. Mark, they wouldn't publish it.
Interesting.
And I'm like, but we're all on the same side here. She goes, yeah, but you can't call out a judge. I'm like, well, there's ego, right? And
Right.
you can't
Right.
call out the clerk. Well, that's ego. And I'm like, but I'm just pointing out all the flaws to say, look, let's put our swords down, come together, and we can do something powerful together. They wouldn't
Yeah.
publish it.
Mhm.
And it's exactly what you're saying, like, with the marketing and the shipping but
Yeah.
this was the judicial system. And it's like, okay.
Reminds me some, there's an exercise that I like to do with groups is describe these four particular types of people. There's people who are visionaries.
Yes.
There's people who are systems people. There are people who like to get stuff done. And there's people who are primarily about people. These are kind of, and I
Okay.
say, choose one and walk and go in that corner. And and it's usually relatively equally divided. And then I say, have a conversation with your group. What is so special about you, your particular quality, your particular strength, and how are you misunderstood by the other groups, right? The visionaries, the systems people, the getting stuff done, and the people. And it's fascinating to act, it's kind of playful and lighthearted, but they see, you know, people who are systems people usually feel like they're not understood, how important it is, the bean counters, the accountants, the people who organize stuff. And but you end up seeing a picture that organizations need those four qualities. And
Yeah.
even within us as individuals, we all need those qualities. But as an organization, to see that, without the visionaries, how would we know where we're going? Without the we wouldn't be communicating very well,
Yeah.
and we need to get stuff done. There's some people, so it's interesting. And I sometimes will put a picture of a beach ball with four different colors.
Right.
Right. So it's one thing. It's one thing with four different pieces but the emphasis is on one. Like you were saying with, the judges, the clerks, they see themselves through the lens of ego
Yeah.
as opposed to seeing themselves through the lens of we're part of a system.
Yeah.
We're part of this and this system needs to work. It needs all these pieces.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think ego gets in the way of actually, saying we opposed to I, and seeing that collective unit going, okay, well, I bring this, but you know what? Just like you were saying, we can do so much more together than I can do individually. Um,
Totally.
and I'm thinking of the analogy or the story or whatnot. I don't remember exactly the thing, but they were, I've heard like, one elephant can pull X amount of weight, but two can pull, and it's like double or triple,
Mhm.
with unity, you can really get so much more done.
Yeah.
But if we're looking at, well, who am I? What do I bring to the table? Um, and that's all you look at from a limited perspective. I recently had, there was a judge here that um, was wanting to go back to in-person mediations. And, I've been doing virtual since 2009. But the judiciary's been doing it since COVID, so 2020. And she said, well, people aren't settling because they're able to sit at home in their pajamas. And so everybody needs to go back in person, which has a valid point to a point. So I reached out to her, sent her an email with actual statistics going, okay, let me give you, I said, I mean, I love this judge, love, very, very good judge. I said, let me just do whatever you're going to do. You're the judge. Thank you for your work. Not easy. But let me give you a different perspective from somebody who is on the ground. This is boots on the ground every day in the trenches, dealing with the people, trying to create, empowerment for the people to take control so that you don't have to. And so, gave statistics going, look, here's the settlement. This is how many mediations I did 3 years prior to COVID. Here's what it was for 3 years post COVID. Here's the number of mediations. Here's the settlement. And and so whether it feels like it or not, the numbers are showing that the settlement is up. And here's why. And a lot of it is like what we're talking about of, the emotions are down, the cost is down. They're not sitting in the same room, but they're able to collaborate. And so, and said, look, we're on the same team. It's just another perspective. That's all. It's just a perspective. There's not a right or wrong. It's just different, and different is okay. And I think that that's where a lot of people, going back to something that you had said, about, being still looking inward and how we label people, as difficult people. I think there's a lot to be said when we say, okay, you're different, therefore it's like you're different, like you're from a different planet, therefore you're bad. Where it's like, well, different is okay. Like, we can have different perspectives, but how do we actually coexist? Because we've got to coexist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, there's no
Yeah.
way around coexisting. Like, we're all on the same planet.
There's a super interesting study. I mean, many studies about this, but one comes to mind about in groups and out groups.
Okay.
And if you've seen where they if you show someone a, an image or a video of someone like getting a needle put into their hand, and you put people in a brain scanner while they're watching this person experience pain, if you then label it, if it is someone who's part of your in group, right? So if you're a Democrat and it's a Democrat, the pain in your brain, the pain it registers much higher than if it's a Republican or if it's
Wow.
a Jew or an Arab or
Sure.
whatever the
Yeah.
differences are. That it is, this is it's a it's a physical thing that you can actually measure in the brain. So it takes part of the work. I mean, this is one of the things I like about this work, and the emotional intelligence isn't fixed, and our brains are not fixed. That we can actually change our views. We can actually, little by little. I think the studies are starting to show that people who are, you know, long-term meditators, for instance, have less of a reaction to this in-group, out-group distinction. That they're kind of we're able to train ourselves to not be quite so triggered and caught by our stories of, this
Sure.
person is different than me.
Yeah. One of the things that, as a mediator, they had trained us on was, number one, leave your own biases at the door. Like, you're not bringing your biases into this. This has nothing to do with you. Leave your biases. That's hard. Like, to be a neutral when you've got opinions, but they're not coming in is difficult. But then, like you're saying, like, turning off, that side of the brain, you know, and whatnot is very difficult. And it's difficult, there was one of the trainings that I had when I did negotiation training at Harvard. One of the professors told us that one of the best ways to be able to deal with the emotional side is to put a pencil or a pen into the hands and have them write out. Because when they start writing, the brain turns emotions off, logic, reason come in. And so a lot of times in mediation, I've created this chart that says, what do I gain from fighting? Well, what do I gain from settling? And I just put one or two things down, and all of a sudden you see this entire shift of the room, because all of a sudden all that emotion, you can just feel it in the room, subsides, because they're having to actually then think and write out. And so then I said, okay, give me your papers. I'm like, okay, I'm going to exchange them. I let the other person, I'm like, the other person's going to read it out loud, what they said. And a lot of times they're on the same page.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great.
But it's
That's
the
great.
emotion that again gets clouded and
Yeah,
logic and reason like, okay, let's find the commonality. Like, what are you going to gain? What are you going to lose? And usually their fears are
yeah,
the same.
yeah,
And sometimes even their goals are the same. They're just arguing how to achieve
yeah,
those goals.
yeah. Well, it's interesting the way emotion gets so tied to our story and our
Yeah.
story about the other person and ourselves. There was a time in my marriage where we were working with a counselor, and she kept coming back. She kept repeating, I think probably to both of us, but I know to me when I met with her individually, drop the story. Drop whatever story you're telling about your wife. It's not going to end well.
Yeah.
It's not going to go where you want it to go. What happens if you can just drop the story and just whatever you're wanting from this other person, you go first.
Yeah.
You're not feeling appreciated, you have to express appreciation,
Yeah.
right? You're not feeling listened
Set
to,
the
or
tone.
you go first. So those two, those again, I think are great. Pithy. Drop the story and you go first.
All right, so I've got a question for you now about that you talk about in your new book, which is Finding Clarity. It comes out April, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, Finding Clarity, How Compassionate Accountability Builds Vibrant Relationships, Thriving Workplaces, and Meaningful Lives. And we've been, really focusing on, the thriving workplace and the meaningful life. So you talk about compassionate accountability. I like those two words together, but I'm not sure what that actually means. So, you talk about the key to dealing with difficult people. So whether that's in relationship or even, like we're talking about, like maybe two different department heads or whatnot, is compassionate accountability. What does that mean? And then how do we apply like this compassionate accountability when dealing with difficult people?
Yeah. I think we've been talking about that throughout this conversation without using those two words,
Okay. Okay.
right? But, accountability means to be to strive for a kind of alignment and clarity about what is it I'm expecting? Am I being clear and transparent and honest with myself? Am I holding myself accountable? In the work situation, it's like, what is the vision of success in terms of what we're trying to achieve, as well as how are we trying to achieve it?
Yeah.
How are you doing at initiating? How are you doing with playing well with others? How are you doing in your listening skills? And
Sure.
being able to have those conversations about accountability, but not in a mean way, and even not in a unemotional way, with compassion.
Yeah.
It's bringing those two things, but together, right? The importance of alignment, of accountability, as well as the importance of the wisdom of the emotions, the wisdom of the human connection, and that we have to have both. And there's, in a way, there's perceived and sometimes real tension between those. Like, it can be, how do we give someone difficult feedback, negative feedback, and do it? It's a little bit like there's an expression in the mediation world, right? Be hard on the problems, but be soft on the people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So hold people accountable, but with a kind of care, that you're to use these difficult conversations, and when you're out of alignment, that even those can be ways of building connection and trust.
Yeah. When I did, and I did it for a very limited time because it was at the courthouse, and then I created my own company, went out on my own. But as a dependency mediator, it was more facilitation than negotiation because we're just sitting there with a whole table full of people. We had Department of Children and Family Services, their attorney, then we had the mom and dad, then we had probably mom and dad's attorney, we had a caseworker, we had the mediator, and with so many different representatives there, what they taught us, which is similar to what you're saying, is is we would ask, and usually somebody, I mean, I'm thinking, I don't think anybody never did, but we usually said, does anybody have a picture of the child? And either the mom, the dad, or even the Department of Children and Family Services in the folder would have a picture of the child. And they would give me the picture of the child, and I'd put it in the center of the table. And I said, all conversations revolve around this. It's a person. And it's not about, well, did or did not mom or dad do this, that, or whatever that created a situation or landed them in the situation? Or are they following a case plan? How do we do what's in the best interest of the child? And it's really focusing on the person and the relationship and what we're all there ultimately for, rather than, because it's very simple with all those different minds and perspectives, it's very easy to get into the blame game.
Yeah. No, I love that example, how, bringing in the picture of the child, it sharpens the mind towards, it's like, what really matters here? What
Yeah.
really matters here?
Yeah.
Whether that's in a marriage or, with your children, right? It's easy to get upset with things that our children do, for example.
Sure.
But it's, and how do we skillfully deal with that, hold our children accountable? But the compassion piece is being aware of, my job here as a parent is to help my child grow and develop it. What's the learning here? How can I build connection here? In the workplace, it can be a little different because there's sometimes sometimes people don't fit. Sometimes
Yeah.
we actually do need to part ways with people. And I even see that as an opportunity, to do it with care. I still care about you as a person.
Sure.
This just isn't the right fit right
Yeah.
now.
Well, and sometimes in the workplace and workplace negotiations, um, you were talking like, okay, relationship matters, but sometimes you may have a negotiation with one person and never see them again. But still, it's still showing the respect that you're expecting to be shown. It's still, dealing with that. And look, the negotiation may not happen, and they may bring in somebody that is a better fit with that particular person for the next negotiation. You know, it
Yeah.
happens. It happens a lot. One of the things, you had touched on, with how we are with children and our goals as parents and whatnot. Sometimes, and I've had to do this occasionally, but when it gets very, very emotional in a mediation where it gets into, again, that, is my planet, you're wrong, you did this, no, you did it, and like so ingrained that we're not going anywhere. And a lot of times with a parenting plan, I tell the people, I said, you have been in the three levels of relationship, which is acquaintance, intimacy, and loss of intimacy. We're now going to transition you into a business-like relationship where you're going to be two CEOs of a company. The company is your child. And you both are CEOs. You're going to have board meetings. All of your communication is going to be in writing. Those are like your minutes. And then we've got time sharing. And that simply is we're just going to look at 365 days out of the year and figure out which parent as the CEO is going to go in and run the office. And your parenting plan is the corporate docs that structure the company. And they let you know what is a CEO, what are you allowed to do and not allowed to do. And by putting it into a business term, it really helps them not see the other person as failed wife, failed husband, failed father, failed mother, but partner,
Right. Team
business
around the
partner.
around the
Yeah.
same.
And I said, the idea is to build the biggest, brightest, most successful company out there. You can't go rogue. You cannot go hiring, firing HR, and your CEO is going to come in on Friday going, where's my HR director? And so I use that analogy a lot with parents to really get them to think of it. We're now moving from the emotion. We're no longer in this thing as emotional. He did, she did. We're business partners and we have a common goal, and that's our child.
Yeah, yeah. The one reframe I might make there, Matthew, is that I don't think the message is that we want to get rid of our emotions. I think the message is we want to not be caught by reacting to our emotions,
Yes.
because um, I think everything actually, all our decision making is being balanced by our emotions.
Yes.
And when our emotions are not running wild, but when we are, when again going back to the very first thing you said about settling, that if we settle our emotion, we can then actually leverage the wisdom of our emotional life. That
Yeah.
our emotions have tremendous wisdom. We can't, put them aside or
Sure.
pretend that they don't exist, but we can train ourselves to not be triggered, to not
Triggered by
be
them.
reacting, to not be caught by blaming, all those things that are our emotions have a lot of traps for sure, but they also have tremendous amount of to inform us and wisdom in those
Yeah.
emotions.
Well, and I've dealt with that, and wholeheartedly agree. One of the other analogies that I've used as well, is, sometimes people need a safe space to just have the difficult conversation. Basically, I call it a controlled burn. We're just gonna, we're just going to let it out in a controlled arena. And sometimes the attorneys are like, look, we don't need to hear about, well, who did what. I'm like, because they're just wanting to move right into the legal part. And I'm like,
Right.
no, we need to do this. And so we do this. And so, going along with what you're saying, I say, it's sort of like we, as human beings, we're a stove. We've got four burners, and we need to be, in this negotiation, we can't take the emotion out of it. Like, we just need to put it on the back burner. We're just not going to drive with emotion. But you can't, and sometimes the attorneys are like, stop, and they'll actually say, stop being so emotional. I'm like, you can't, like, okay, I'm a robot. We're just going to turn off like, you can't, but we just can't be driven. So it's like we're a stove. We're going to take our emotions. We can't take them off the stove. We're just going to move them to the back burner, and we're going to let logic and reason, and we're going to listen, and we're going to make decisions that, yes, we understand we're emotional, but we're not going to make them solely based on emotion. It's still part of the equation. And
Yeah.
so sometimes I've got to do that as well, like,
Yeah.
you know,
I
juggle
was,
that.
yeah. I was kind of hoping that you were going to disagree with me and that we would need some mediation. Yeah.
No, no, not at all. So something else. So in your book, you mention Homer Simpson, Alice in Wonderland, and Buddha about compassion and accountability, and draw conclusions there. I'm interested on hearing a little bit about that,
Yeah,
especially.
I love, to me, Homer Simpson is a great teacher in that anything you want to know about accountability, he will teach you by doing the opposite.
So look at him, do completely opposite. You'll be okay.
Especially, again, I'm often, and I think it's one of my favorite Homerisms is, why does everything have to be so hard? Right? I mean, as I was trying to log in and use the technology, and like it's like for a moment it wasn't quite working, and I noticed like just some like, oh, why does this have to be hard? Or really, whatever it is that like uh, or all the other things that he does to get out of holding himself or others accountable and his bad advice. And so to me, then the historical Buddha answers the question, well, why do things have to be so hard? Well, that's kind of the way it is in human life is not easy.
Yeah.
There's challenges, there's difficulty. Um, you know, sometimes Buddhism gets translated as life is suffering. That's not quite it. It's more like there's no avoiding difficulty. There's no avoiding challenge. Don't, no, notice how we respond to challenge. And then I bring in Alice in Wonderland as the practice, who
Okay.
says curiouser and curiouser. She's just kind of as she finds herself in Wonderland, right? So I think there's something about having a state of wonder, a state of awe, a state of curiosity is a great practice in response to the challenges and difficulties of being um, a human being in
Yeah.
this time.
Well, and having that curiosity. I heard a quote. It reminds me of a quote I heard recently where it said, if one enters into a conversation with anybody, assuming that they have something to teach them or to offer, well, then the conversation's automatically going to go differently than if you enter it assuming that they bring nothing to the table. And that's that curiosity. So, like if you and I are going to have a conversation, it's like, well, what in the world could Mark possibly teach me? Well, then we're going to have a completely different conversation than, okay, what's going on? What do you know that I don't know? Like, and I think that curiosity is where, again, where I think we can possibly find the differences that if we're not defensive and if we're open to learning, we can find the unity and then we can sort of coexist, even though we think we might be from different planets.
Yeah. And I think this is our ongoing lifetime work, again, whether it's as partners or parents or teachers or workers, this cultivating a mindset of being an ongoing curious learner, and noticing when we're not, noticing when our egos are showing up, when we are either overreacting or underreacting, which we will do, and not beating ourselves up for it, even being curious even about our own overreacting or underreacting.
Yeah, yeah. And and I think so I I st- I got on a journey many years ago with just I started it with my ex-wife in therapy, and then she stopped going, and I was curious. I was like Alice. I'm like, okay, wait a second. The therapist noticed something in me. And I started this journey going, okay, and what else can you tell me? And what else can I figure out? I think a lot of people are starting to, like, through the years, I think that therapy has lost its stigma of, oh, you're in therapy, sort of like depression or anxiety, where it's not just, oh, you people. Like, no, that's all of us on this planet. But I really think that therapy, whether individual, couples, um, is very helpful in discovering the who you are, what makes you tick, to where then you can start to relate to others better, maybe on a different level. Um, how does I mean? I guess therapy. I don't know. I mean, in your experience working with big companies and stuff and corporations, it's not like couples therapy, but are there exercises or what do you do with that?
I mean, I do a lot of, my primary day job these days is executive coaching.
Okay.
And it's not
One
therapy.
on one? Is it one
One
on
on
one or
one on one,
group or
mostly one on one.
okay. Okay.
And it definitely has a therapeutic element to it,
Okay.
although I'm not trying to dredge up the past as much as a
Sure.
therapist would,
Sure.
but I am looking for, psychological challenges and issues and triggers and stories, and trying to help the person be the best that they can
Yeah.
in most effective. And also there's often a well-being and productivity part of coaching. Um, and I think I often will, proclaim that I think everyone should have a therapist
Yes. Yes.
and a coach and a body worker, and I'm also a Zen teacher, which you know and the Zen teacher part of me is in a way a blend of all of these things. I
Sure.
think, to me, Zen is just a code word for how to be a full, thriving human being.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we need help. I think um, it's challenging.
Yeah.
There's one of my favorite book titles is a book um, by John Kabat-Zinn, who really brought mindfulness to the modern world, and the book is called Full Catastrophe Living.
Yeah.
And it's like we're do you and it comes from a conversation from Zorba the Greek, where he's asked, are you married? Do you have kids? Do you have a job? Yes, I've got the full catastrophe. And most of us have the full catastrophe of the modern life.
Yeah. So, so in your work, like if a listener wanted to, hire you for any of those capacities, whether it be a business coach, whether it be a Zen master, how would they get a hold of you? How would they find you?
My website is my name, marklesser.net, marclesser.net.
Okay.
Yeah, lots of information. I also have a podcast that I'm doing called Zen Bones these
Zen
days.
Bones,
Zen
Bones.
Bones, Ancient Wisdom for Modern Times.
Awesome.
Also can be found on my website, and I'm excited with my new book, as you mentioned, coming out April 11th,
Yeah.
Finding Clarity.
Now, is that your first book, or do you have
It's
other
actually
books?
my fifth book.
Fifth book. All right. So, where would they go to find Amazon?
Of course, Amazon or your local bookstore or any place you buy books. But yeah, Amazon, of course.
Okay. Question for you: Are they in audio format or? di-
They're all in audio format,
Oh, awesome.
Kindle, yeah, hard
Okay.
copy.
All right. Question for you: Do you read the audio format?
You know, I didn't in my last book. I'm
Okay.
hoping to in this one.
Okay. I'm an audio learner. So if I'm reading, it's actually audiobooks. I love audible.com. I love Audible. I get all my books from there. And what I really, really love is I love when the author themselves read the book because then you really get their emotion, what they're really wanting to like get you to subscribe and get with. I love when the author reads their actual books.
Totally. I'm making a strong case for why I should do this book, and I just had to send my publisher a sample of my reading. They're
Sure.
kind of making sure that I'll do it well enough, but I want to do
It's
it.
your book. Nobody's going to do it as good as the author. I mean, again,
Oh,
just to get
yeah.
just to
Although
get
I was
your
surprised. My last book was called Seven Practices of a Mindful Leader,
okay.
and someone else did the audiobook. I was like, man, he was good. He did a really good
Yeah.
job.
Yeah, I mean, they're not
Was it?
bad. Yeah, I mean, I've never had an audiobook that the author didn't read that was like, oh, well, that was really bad. But then when I've actually come across ones where they have read it, I'm like, wow, it's I don't, there's just a depth to it.
Totally,
There's
totally.
just a depth to it. So, well, Mark, it's been great chatting with you. I greatly appreciate you coming on the show, and I wish you the best. It's just, and congratulations on the new grandbaby. For more information about my services or to schedule your mediation with me, either in person or using my iChat mediation virtual platform built by Cisco Communications, visit me online at imediateinc.com. Call me at 561-262-9121, toll free at 877-822-1479, or email me at mbrickman@ichatmediation.com.